Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just saw Disney's live action remake of Aladdin. Let's talk about it. So this year's live action remake of the Disney classic is directed by Guy Ritchie, and I'm actually a huge fan of Guy Ritchie's films. I like the Sherlock Holmes films, I liked Man from U.N.C.L.E., and I even enjoyed King Arthur. I thought it was really fun. It did have some issues, obviously, but it was a fun ride nonetheless. I have to say though, when it came to the pairing of Guy Ritchie with Aladdin, it didn't quite make sense to me. Perhaps another director would have really dived into the culture and the lore that surrounds Aladdin far better than Guy Ritchie could. At least that was my suspicion going in, and I have to say that that's kind of my impression coming out of the film as well. We're going to dive into some of the positives and the negatives of this film, but overall just know that there will be spoilers because I can't seem to be able to discuss a film without going into any spoilers. So without further ado, let's go into the good parts of this film. So I have to say I really enjoyed Mina Masood's performance as Aladdin. Now initially I was a bit worried because initially you're introduced to him and he's in the marketplace and he's doing his thieving and trying to survive in this rough world, and I didn't quite feel the charisma coming from him at that point. I was a little worried because Aladdin is such a charming, endearing character. He's not like the other princes in the Disney pantheon. He's very much an underdog and you root for him because despite his circumstances he has a heart of gold. This is definitely portrayed very well by Mina Masood in this film. I think he came across as a genuine Aladdin type character. You definitely get the sense that he is the diamond in the rough, that he is someone with a heart of gold, but because of the circumstances that he lives in, he's just been continually dismissed as a street rat and no one has ever thought better of him, at least until he goes into the Cave of Wonders. So I really appreciated Mina Masood's performance there. I thought it was very convincing. I will say that this version of Aladdin is surprisingly good at parkour. He's very good at jumping across buildings and very good at surviving in life-threatening events. So that was pretty impressive, I guess. I think his entire performance really comes into its stride when we finally meet the genie and we see his interactions with him, and the whole film as a whole just kind of elevates as soon as that Cave of Wonders sequence comes about. Now in terms of the genie, I was very skeptical when I first saw the trailers and the teasers for this film. I thought the CG looked horrific and Will Smith just looked weird in this blue version of himself. In the film, it's not that much different. There are moments where it looks better than others, but in terms of the genie's appearance, I didn't love it. I think it looks very fake, it looks very CG and wonky, so that wasn't the best part of this character. Now going to the personality of the character, I would say that Robin Williams' performance as the genie is one of the best performances in any animated Disney film ever, and it would be so hard to top that performance because it's so iconic and it was so perfect the way that he executed this character. I have to say that over here Will Smith doesn't elevate what Robin Williams already presented as the genie. In fact, he borrows a lot of what already existed from the original film. A lot of the same jokes are put in here, a lot of the same gags and visualizations are put in here. Will Smith's main contribution to this version of the genie is more of a kind of urban hip-hop version of the songs, some of the dance sequences that they involve in this film as well. But overall, in terms of the genie's personality, it's essentially just Robin Williams by way of Will Smith. While that's very entertaining, I had a fun time revisiting some of the really funny gags from the original film. I had to say that it doesn't really offer much originality to the role. In terms of the supporting characters that I really enjoyed, you have Raj, who's beautifully actualized via CG but has very little personality. Then you have Abu, whose CG is a bit wonky, but whose personality really comes across in this film. So there's a bit of a juxtaposition there. But then you have, honestly, I don't even think I should mention it in this positive section. I think it's not a positive at all. But I'm going to say that the character of Iago was done dirty in this film. I absolutely hated the way that this character was portrayed in this remake. Iago has so much personality in the original film, and the original voice actor in that one definitely had a croaky, kind of annoying voice, but it was a signature voice. It was one where you hear it and you immediately identify Iago. Here, his voice sounds so robotic. It sounds lifeless. It sounds emotionless. He's kind of speaking as Jafar's conscious and diving into Jafar's deepest and darkest desires and speaking them out loud. That's kind of his purpose in this film. He's not a character in his own right over here. He's very much just a loudspeaker for Jafar's deepest and darkest desires. Speaking of Jafar, I really enjoyed the layers of story that they added to this character. Now, it's not that deep, but I will say that in the original film, he's kind of just a faceless, malicious villain, which is absolutely fine. He's great there. But here they kind of given him a bit of an obscure backstory, which actually really, really works in this film. The fact that they established that Jafar was just like Aladdin, he came from a very similar background, and he had to claw his way up in the food chain in order to get at least a semblance of respect. And he has this obsession in his head of trying to be the most powerful person in the room and truly believing with all his heart that if he's not the most powerful, then he's nothing at all. And that's kind of the complex that he's working with. So it works really, really well in that end scene when Aladdin tricks him and manipulates this weakness in order to get him to turn himself into a genie, only to end up being trapped in the lamp, just like the other genie. I think that was a very smart move because that complex and that insecurity really worked against him in the end, and that was something that was established in this film very well. I love the fact that you kind of juxtapose that against Aladdin, who has chosen a different route, and he was almost going to go down that route. He was almost going to succumb to the temptations of gaining more power and being someone that he isn't, but in the end he makes the right decision and he ends up the better person for it. In addition to this, I like the fact that the lamp is stolen by Jafar, and they kind of show this in a very Guy Ritchie way. I don't think it was necessary to go back and show how it was definitely Jafar who stole the lamp. Maybe that was more applicable for younger viewers who may have been slightly confused by how Aladdin lost the lamp. I don't know, but just for me, I don't think it was necessary to go back and retread how exactly Aladdin ended up losing it. Some of the background characters that I really enjoyed were Jamal, the market seller, and Hakim, the head of the King's Guard. I really like their depictions here. I like the fact that they got actors from the actual region of the Middle East being represented in this story, and we'll talk a bit more about that when we get to the negatives of this film, but I really appreciated their presence in this film. I think it just helped to flesh out the world of Agrabah much more efficiently and make it feel more like a Middle Eastern town that could exist. Next, let's talk about the sets and the costuming. Both, in my opinion, were absolutely excellent. I love the set of Agrabah. I love the marketplace, the palace. Everything just looked so beautiful and it's so distinct. On the one hand, I really love that they gave this setting the same kind of treatment that they did with a French village in Beauty and the Beast. I really appreciated the sets there, and I definitely think it benefited from this A+ treatment because it created such a beautiful and richly colored world. Having said that, I will say the downside to this is that it looks very clean. Everything looks very crisp. It looks very manufactured. None of the buildings feel like they've been lived in for very long. Nothing looks authentically broken down and muddied up. Like, it looks very clean, very pristine. The same can be said for the costuming. Now, I'm a big fan of the costumes in this film, especially when it comes to Princess Jasmine. One of the downsides of the animated version of the princess is that she definitely did not have that many costume changes. I think she only had about 3 in the original film, but here she definitely has these beautiful costumes, beautiful dresses. They look absolutely amazing. I love them. They very much benefited from the live action nature of this film because there was so much more detail, so many different textures and colors in there that you wouldn't really be able to capture using 2D animation. So I appreciated that upgrade very much. But having said that, again, it was a bit too clean. I would just say that that's that's all part of the Disneyfication of the situation. But it's something to note when it comes to this film, because it does mean that the set, whilst beautiful, never feels real. Nothing feels very authentic, which is bizarre because usually in Guy Ritchie films, wherever he sets his films, they definitely feel like real worlds that have been lived in. So it was kind of bizarre to see this kind of set piece that felt very distant and felt very manufactured. We also have the return of our favorite songs, Never Had a Friend Like Me, Prince Ali. Mwah, beautiful sequences. I absolutely love them. Again, they're pretty much the same as in the original film. There aren't huge differences here, but I really enjoyed them. Going back to Beauty and the Beast and the live action remake of that film, I very much enjoyed the Be Our Guest sequence, and it was kind of on par with some of the sequences that we found here. So I really appreciated just how much love and attention they put into these songs, because they are absolutely classic, timeless songs. Loved them and loved seeing this rendition of them, despite the fact that they're not that much different to the ones that we got in the original film. However, one difference that they did make was to the Arabian Nights song. They changed a few of the lyrics there to make it slightly less aggressive and stereotypical. But other than that, the songs are pretty much the same, apart from the new Jasmine solo that they inserted in here called Speechless. I think it's a really nice song. I don't think it quite gels with the rest of the soundtrack, and it doesn't feel as timeless as the other songs do. That might be kind of a recency bias, but I feel like this song feels much more poppy and much more of the time, like of 2019, than the other songs do. So now that brings us to some of the negatives of this film. And firstly, you may have noticed that I did not mention Jasmine in my character breakdown before. That's because she unfortunately lands herself here. I was not a huge fan of Naomi Scott's depiction of this character. The original Jasmine was filled with so much more personality. She has an allure to her, she has a sassiness to her, but at the same time, deep down, she feels trapped because she isn't allowed to leave the palace. She's not allowed to explore the world. And so when she finally does, it feels freeing. And when she sees Aladdin on that magic carpet, she sees an opportunity to do something that she's never been able to do before. Somehow they haven't quite conveyed that same sense of wonder in Jasmine in this version. I feel like Naomi Scott's very much a know-it-all type character. They've given her elements to the character to kind of modernize her a little bit, at least in their eyes, but I don't think it really works. For example, the fact that she longs to be the Sultan is an interesting twist, because she wants to have a leadership role and she's constantly overlooked purely because of her gender, and that is fascinating. That is an interesting direction to take the character. However, they never really explore her talents as a leader. We never really see her interact with the people, and I feel like that's a huge problem with some of the films these days, where you have a female character who is ambitious and wants to achieve something, then the work isn't really put in to establish what her character traits are and how she would actually excel in this role. It's just the fact that she wants the role, and because she's a woman, she's been limited, and that's kind of supposed to make you root for the character. But I don't think it's quite enough. I think in this day and age, we need to see well-rounded female characters, so that when they do have these ambitions, we do feel like we want to root for them and they deserve that position of power. In the case of Jasmine, the fact that she loves reading maps and books, and the fact that she spoke up for herself at the end of the film, does not really qualify her as a good sultan. Having said that, her father is a terrible sultan, so she can't do any worse than him. At least in the original film, they established that the sultan was dim, like he was stupid, and it was a character trait of his, so it made sense that, you know, he overlooked a lot of Jafar's meddling, and he came across as a very absent ruler. This version of the story also gives Princess Jasmine a sidekick of her own in the form of the handmaiden named Dahlia. I thought she was cute. I don't really think she was necessary for this story. I think the actress's performance here was a bit hit or miss. I actually enjoyed some of the funny parts that she had to play, but I don't think a lot of the audience in my cinema really responded to it. They weren't very receptive to her as a character, especially not the younger audience. I also really disliked that C storyline of the genie falling in love with the handmaiden. That to me was just so unnecessary. It did not need to be there at all. I could just see Will Smith saying, I think I should have a bigger role in this, and I would have just, no, it's fine. The genie is just his own thing. He doesn't have to be human too at the end of it. Like, he just wanted to explore the world. That's fine. Don't give him a love interest, please. Leave it alone. I wasn't a fan. Wasn't a fan there. Finally, I mentioned earlier that I really appreciated having authentic, region accurate actors being represented in this film. Having said that, there were a lot of non-Arabian or non-Middle Eastern actors in this film, mostly in the background, except for Billy Magnussen, who stood out like a sore thumb. But I will say that I wasn't a huge fan of them either. They definitely stood out to me. There were a lot of black people here, and it's not even the fact that they were black, it's the fact that they had very modern hairstyles. I don't know if anyone else noticed, but it stood out to me specifically because obviously I'm looking out for that kind of thing, and it just felt very jarring overall to see that, because they definitely did not feel authentic. It added to the sense of it being a Broadway production rather than an actual cinematic experience. And then you also have the fact that Will Smith kind of inflicted this hip-hop style in a lot of the dance sequences in this film, when I think they should have just gone down the Middle Eastern or at least Bollywood route, rather than trying to Americanize the situation. I'm not obviously from that region, so I don't know how people from that region would feel with this depiction of the story. I guess that kind of just depends on people's perspectives on creative license. So overall, what were my thoughts on this film? Well, Aladdin is one of my favorite Disney animated classics ever. So this was really the first film in the pantheon that came out that I was really worried about, because the other ones, Alice in Wonderland, Cinderella, The Jungle Book, Beauty and the Beast, I know for a lot of people Beauty and the Beast is very much up there, but for me personally, I never really adored that film. So this was the first one where I was like, oh, the stakes are very high, and if they flop this, it might actually annoy me. I wouldn't say that they flopped this outright, but they definitely didn't add anything positive to it. I don't think it was necessary at all. The original film is a perfect version of itself. It should have just been left alone. It's just an outright retelling of the same story, just in live action form. And to the point that I made at the beginning of this video, did Guy Ritchie need to direct this film? Absolutely not. Like I said, like Guy Ritchie's films. I think they're really fun, and he has some interesting artistic imprints in all of his films, but there were none here. I did not feel like this was a Guy Ritchie film in the slightest, and so as a result, I don't really feel like he was necessary to pick as a director. They could have gone for a Bollywood director, someone who's much more familiar with this type of setting, and they would have inserted a bit more culture, a bit more richness into it to give it a really Middle Eastern or maybe even Indian imprint on it. And of course, they're not the same thing, but they're certainly closer than Guy Ritchie is to the Aladdin story. So with all of that said, I'm going to give Aladdin, the live action remake, a 6.5 out of 10. So now that I told you guys what my thoughts were on the live action remake of Aladdin, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch any new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!